Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And welcome those of you here in person, and welcome those of you who are joining us online. Thank you for being with us today. Earlier this spring, while I was attending a President's Council up in Denver, we had the pleasure of having our guests with us today. And so I'm going to be introducing Joy Athanasiou and her colleague Victor. I'm sorry, Victor, what's your last name?
Galvin.
Sorry, please say
Galvin.
Galvin. Victor Galvin, who is with us, and I'm just really pleased to have them. I was really struck in the visit that Joy did with all of the community college system presidents by the clarity and confidence of her voice, her knowledge of the immigration landscape that we're dealing with. There has been so much of muddy information out there, and I would say sort of a real lack of being able to speak with confidence about these issues. And I heard a voice that rang with clarity and knowledge when Joy talked there. And so I thought immediately when she was talking, I need to get this person to Pikes Peak State College, because so many of us have been deeply concerned about immigration issues and about what kind of information and the quality of information that we can give to students, that we can give to employees, that we can give to family members of our employees and students out there. And so deeply concerning issues for many of us at Pikes Peak State College, and really thrilled to have their voices here to help us. So in introduction, Joy is a Denver-based immigration specialist attorney, and that is it's a little bit like a specialist doctor. You become an attorney and then you become an immigration specialist, and she has for years been the go-to attorney for individuals and families seeking legal assistance in the areas of immigration, deportation law, asylum, and refugee law. She's an expert on complex immigration policy and a respected voice in the national immigration advocacy conversation. She began practicing immigration law in the fall of 2001, just after 9/11, and weeks after the very first federal DREAM Act died in committee. In 2007, Joy became co-chair of the AILA, Colorado Legislative Advocacy Committee, and determined to advocate for legalization and needed congressional reforms. Joy is joined by Victor Galvin. Victor is a passionate advocate for justice and immigrant rights. Born in Chihuahua, Mexico, Victor moved to Denver with his parents as an infant. At just 16 years old, he began navigating the complexities of being an immigrant and quickly became a powerful voice for change. Victor has played a pivotal role in advancing key legislative initiatives and co-created a number of coalitions. He is currently the Environmental Justice Administrator for the City and County of Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, where he administers a portion of the Climate Protection Fund. And Victor, as I was telling him earlier, he's not only a great source of information, but a great source of inspiration to us all as well. So Victor, thank you. Today, Joy and Victor will help us become better informed about the U.S. immigration system, our history as a nation of immigrants, attitudes towards immigrants throughout history, and key aspects of the current immigration climate. Together, they will also help us understand our basic constitutional rights, learn the difference between local police and immigration officers, and identify key phrases to best assert our rights in different situations. With that, I am very pleased and proud to turn it over to Joy and Victor. Thank you again for both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, I think I want to start with how many of us either are immigrants or have immigrant parents or come from immigrant families?
Actually, can I expand my question just a little bit?
Sure.
Anybody here born and raised in Colorado Springs? Two. And then anyone else that has moved here from another city? You raise your hand. I just love seeing like the immigrant representation in the room. Thank you so much for being here.
So essentially, almost everyone in the United States has an immigrant story, right? Either with our immediate relatives or stories that are passed down from generations of how our grandparents or our great-grandparents or our ancestors first came to the United States. Many people came for the same reasons that people are coming right now, because they suffered some type of persecution in their home country, or because they were undergoing famine or starvation or some other kind of war or natural disaster. But essentially, all of our stories are the stories that have been basically the history of our country and the defining history of our country. So, and the only individuals who do not share that experience are our indigenous Native Americans, who have lived through these successive waves of immigration. You know, starting from the 15 or 1600s, and watched as different people came to our shores for different reasons, but all with this shared stories, so to speak, and all with shared goals: to find peace, to find stability, to find a place where they could just raise their family and give their children opportunity. And that hasn't changed. Now, we're just going to spend a couple minutes going through the history, because we have a lot to cover in a short period of time. But essentially, our immigration laws were non-existent until the late 1800s. And our very first laws were in 1882, and one of the main laws that was passed was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So one of the very first laws ever in the United States on immigration was the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what did it do? It excluded Chinese. So at that time, every person is welcome on our shore. Every person can just walk in the front door unless you're Chinese. And then we saw, from the late 1800s until 1924, we saw several similar laws, not necessarily directed toward a particular country, but directed toward people who were illiterate, people who were public drunkards, people who were, vagabonds, and all these words that they used to describe undesirables. But in essence, unless you met one of these, quote, undesirable categories, everybody could come in the front door. In 1924 was the first time that we really had a major immigration law that set a system and essentially set quotas. And in 1924, they said, okay, now we're going to put some rules on it, and we're going to set quotas. So anybody can come from Western or Northern Europe, but almost nobody can come from anywhere else in the world. At that point, nearly 70% of visas were given to nationals of Germany, England, and Ireland. And the other 30% went to the rest of the world, except Asia. Because the one thing that they did is they said, let's not just exclude China, let's actually exclude most of Asia. And that remained the law until 1952. Now, the law that we have today is based on the Immigration Act of 1952 and 1965. So the system that created then is the system that we have right now. And there has been very little updating of that system. Since that time, we've adopted many bars, many restrictions, many grounds of what we call inadmissibility or deportability, but we haven't fundamentally changed that system. So this, under the system from 1952 and 1965, there are basically three general categories of immigration: family, employment, and humanitarian. Now, almost all of our immigration comes through, actually, I should say the largest chunk by far comes through our family-based system. In fact, nearly 25% of immigrants come to the United States through one way. Does anybody know what that is? Marriage. Love. So 25% of immigration is marriage-based cases, a U.S. citizen falling in love with somebody from another country and asking that they be allowed to come to the U.S. or stay in the U.S. if they're already here. But then we have employment, and then we have humanitarian, okay? Under family sponsorship, you have to have a very specific relationship to come. U.S. citizens can sponsor spouses, parents, children, and siblings. That's it. There is no cousin visa, there is no grandchild visa, there is no great niece visa. So you hear a lot of these stories in the media. There's just absolutely no truth to those stories.
I do want to add that that was true before, and that's where a lot of that actually comes from.
Yes.
Before 1996, before IRA 96, which established the more nuclear family, you could bring in cousins, grandparents, uncles, aunts through a visa petitioning process for a family member.
Yes, so that's what I was alluding to, how we keep restricting it, but we don't actually change or update the system. Permanent residents, so individuals who are here with a green card or have permanent resident status, can sponsor their spouse and minor children, and can also sponsor adult unmarried children. But very important for permanent residents, their children can never get married until their final process is concluded and they've been granted permanent residence. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. For employment, so non-immigrant are all of our temporary workers. Immigrant are when employers sponsor somebody to come here permanently. For our temporary workers, we have all these visas that you may have heard about in the news. We have the H-1B, we have the H-2B, we have the L, we have a G, we have an A, we have an I. So it's kind of like the alphabet soup. The important thing to understand is nearly all of those visas are very specialized for a very small select group of people, like diplomats, or international journalists, or an international dance troupe. Or workers. For workers, nearly all visas go to college degree workers and above, either highly specialized or highly skilled. We only have 2 visas in the law for people without a college degree, and that is our seasonal agriculture, H-2A, and our seasonal non-agriculture, H-2B. We do not have a visa for some of the workers that we need the most. Any year-round worker who does not have a college degree, who's either in our skilled trades, in a lot of our hospitality industries, a lot of our healthcare industries, there is absolutely no visa in the law for those workers. On the permanent resident side, for immigrants, same story. Nearly all visas are for highly skilled. There are very few, and this is numerical, visas for low-skilled workers. Now, the other problem with the family and the employment-based categories is that a few specific subcategories within there are called immediate, where they can immediately start processing. Most are in this enormous backlog. We limit the number of visas every year, and there are huge waiting lists. For example, adult children of a U.S. citizen from Mexico are stuck waiting for about 30 years. Highly skilled workers from India are in a waiting list that is estimated to be 80 to 100 years long.
I do want to add on this part that this is a failure on the United States part of a practice of equity and equality, where they grant equal amount of visas on an annual basis to every single country in the world that they are allied with. And so Mexico gets the same as like Luxembourg, right? Whereas Mexico is a neighbor and has a high population and demand on those visas and uses those day one of the incoming year. Luxembourg has thousands of visas that go unused because 1, they don't have the population to actually meet that need, and 2, there's less need for Luxembourgians to actually travel to the United States.
Yes. So no single country can actually be awarded more than 7% of the worldwide total every year. So it creates this enormous disparity. So anyone who does not fit within those narrow boxes of the family or the employment, there is another small category called humanitarian. Humanitarian covers everything from your refugees, your asylees, what you hear about in the news, TPS, temporary protected status. It also includes DACA, although we don't have new DACA. We only have DACA available to renewals, and that's ending, which we'll talk about in a minute. It also has another big category of victims. And then there's also many very tiny specific programs for specific populations of people. There are some special rules for Cubans. There are special laws for children born in Vietnam to U.S. service member fathers during the Vietnam War. And there are other similar very tiny programs. And then the very last is our victims. Victims can be victims of crime, victims of domestic violence, or victims of trafficking, including labor trafficking, any kind of indentured servitude, or any kind of sexual-based trafficking. That's essentially our system. There are a couple of other tiny programs, but overall, if you don't fit into one of these little categories, there is no way to immigrate to the United States. So for the vast majority of would-be immigrants, there's no way to come. For the vast majority of people who are here without status, either they had no status to begin with, or they lost their status for whatever reason, there is no way to legalize. That's our system, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to explain that we still have a system from 1952 and 1965. It is horrifically outdated. And if you think about what our society looks like right now, you think about what our society looked like then and how our needs have changed, but our laws have not kept up. And as I mentioned earlier, the one thing that we have done is we've imposed a lot more bars. So there are so many more restrictions now than what we used to have. Okay, so I'm going to go through just real quick and talk about a few of the administrative actions since the beginning of the Trump administration. And DACA actually started before that because we've had this ongoing court case. But we do anticipate, DACA was at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It has gone back down to the original trial judge. And we do anticipate a ruling to come out from that court at any time now. I would say any time between now and the end of fall that we anticipate that ruling.
Do you want to define DACA before we move forward? There might be some people that don't know.
Yes. So if anybody does not understand, DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What it is it's not a status per se, but it is a protection against removal, and it's considered temporary lawful permission to be in the United States. And DACA was created under President Obama to give young people who grew up in the United States, and this is the only country they know, a way to just be able to live with authorization and live their lives, have work authorization, go to school, et cetera, and have some protection against deportation. Now, because of these court decisions, we know that it was already ruled unlawful. We expect that ruling will be held by the original judge now that it's gone back to. And we anticipate that the overall program will end in the next few months. Right now, it has allowed people who have had DACA to continue renewing their DACA. We anticipate that this court ruling will either end DACA immediately or say to everyone who still has a valid work permit, it's going to end at the end of your work permit. And for most of those individuals, unfortunately, there is really no path to gaining any kind of other status or permanent residence. A lot of people ask me, is advanced parole still possible? Technically, yes. And we have had people who have successfully re-entered just in the last couple of weeks under advanced parole. But there's a very significant risk. If anyone has DACA and is thinking about traveling, you must consult with an immigration attorney and make sure that it's going to be safe for you to return.
Could you define advanced parole?
Advanced parole is permission to travel. And so advance is you're getting that permission in advance, and parole is basically a travel document for people who don't have a visa. So parole is we're going to give you this travel permission to enter the United States even though you don't have a normal visa or authorization. Okay, so I'm just going to hit on a few of the administrative actions that have happened since the beginning of the Trump administration, because these have been in the news quite a bit. TPS, anyone who has TPS status, the Trump administration has terminated a couple of TPS programs, particularly for Venezuelans, and then CNHV, which was a special program for Cuban, Nicaraguan, Haitian, and Venezuelan. That program has also been terminated, and then just in the last week and a half, people started getting notices who entered lawfully under what we call CBP-1 parole, saying your parole has been terminated as of right now, you need to leave. The first two have already had very specific stays entered by the courts, meaning that that decision to terminate is on hold, so those individuals still have status. There is separate litigation pending on the CBP-1 parole. We're hoping that there's going to be successful litigation around that as well. So those three I wanted to touch on. A couple other things I just want to mention. Everybody has heard about birthright citizenship and the Trump administration action to end birthright citizenship. That has been stayed by numerous courts, but we did just learn in the last week that the Supreme Court is planning to bring that up. It will actually be in a few months when they take that up. I do want to mention briefly asylum. So asylees are refugees. Refugees can come to the U.S. two different ways. One, they do the refugee processing overseas, usually through the UNHCR and international NGOs. They enter the U.S. as refugees. People who cannot access that system can come to our border, anywhere along the border, and request asylum. They can also request asylum from inside the U.S. You cannot request asylum from anywhere else in the world. You have to be on U.S. soil or close international waters. Asylum is very important, particularly for people whose parole is being terminated, because many of the individuals who rolled in, it's because they expressed a fear of returning. So asylum is available. You must apply within 1 year of arriving in the United States, and the basis is that you were persecuted in your home country for what we call a protected ground. Protected ground is going to be things like race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or particular social group. And so individuals must apply within 1 year. However, for people who have been in the U.S. over 1 year, they still may be eligible for protection if they fear being tortured in their home country under the Torture Convention. So this is a very important law under U.S. law and international law that we cannot return people to their home country who face persecution or torture. What happens next? Obviously, we don't know. We can only anticipate what other actions are going to come. We do anticipate more actions happening by the Trump administration. What's really important is for anyone who is not a citizen to please consult with an immigration attorney and find out what your rights are, what your obligations are, and particularly if you have any questions about obtaining lawful status or extending your stay. Now, the other brand new thing that has just happened and that went into effect on April 11th is this registration requirement. This is an old law from 1940 that has not been used in eons. But the Trump administration is now requiring non-citizens to register, all non-citizens ages 14 and up, to register and carry proof of registration with them at all times. What's really important to understand about that is that many people by law have already registered. So all these individuals do not need to register because they already have. Anyone with a green card, anyone who's ever applied for a green card or permanent residence, anyone who entered under a visa or parole or a border crosser card, anyone who has ever been in removal or deportation proceedings, anyone ever granted a work permit, and refugees. So it's really important to understand that registration requirement. If you believe that requirement applies to you, again, super important, consult with an attorney to find out all of the rights and obligations of doing that and the risks. Now, we're gonna skip for just a minute. When I was talking about consulting with an immigration attorney, just one quick reminder. You need to meet with an actual attorney who practices immigration law and has experience. Immigration is considered one of our most complex areas of law, and requires a great deal more, not only learning, but just staying on top of the law than many other areas. It's very important to actually work with an attorney, not a notario, not a paralegal, not a legal assistant, not a consultant. It is unlawful for anybody who is not a lawyer to give you advice or help you prepare forms. Attorneys must all have an active law license, and most immigration attorneys are going to be members of AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So at a minimum, we recommend that you consult with an immigration attorney and carry the attorney's card with you at all times. Okay. Is there any questions on that part of the presentation? Yes.
I'm sorry, yes. So everyone online can hear. If you're talking from the audience, we need you to come to a microphone. You do not need to identify yourself. We just want everybody to be able to hear what's being said.
Could you just explain what was the basis for the registration requirement, and if you think for some reason that you need to do that, what are, besides consulting with an attorney, an immigration attorney, what is the process, and like what are next steps, what are the forms, like what is all that?
You can easily go online and Google USCIS registration requirement, and that shows the process. And there's a form, a G325A, that needs to be filled out. But as I said before, what's really important about the requirement is that in reality, most non-citizens have already registered. So the only individuals who have not registered and who this applies to are individuals who enter the US unlawfully and have never had any contact with immigration whatsoever. Never had any kind of benefits application, never been in removal proceedings. So individuals who have really stayed off the radar entirely with regard to immigration. But there are also some very big risks with registering, and that's why it's so important for individuals to consult with an attorney before they register. And we're hoping there's some litigation brewing around this, because in some ways, the act of registering is basically asking people to incriminate themselves, which our Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says we have a right not to incriminate ourselves. So we're hoping that that there will be some strong litigation and this will be stayed or blocked by the courts. But at this point, it's too early to know.
I think we have another question.
Okay, so I need reiteration or clarification in what President Trump said in regards to the she just said it to the birthright. That was, yes, the birthright citizenship was created to make slaves citizens. Could you reiterate on that? Could you clarify what he meant by that? And is that true?
Sort of. At that time, slaves were not permitted to be U.S. citizens. There were a few other groups who were not permitted to be U.S. citizens. And so we had the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution that was specifically put in the Constitution to allow all individuals born on U.S. soil to be considered citizens. And it's interesting because even after that, there was still some legal argument and still some pushing against that notion for Native Americans. So Native Americans did not have full citizenship rights until, I think, 1940 something. But yes, part of that, part of the basis for putting the 14th Amendment in the Constitution was to ensure that slaves would be citizens. And again, with also with other groups.
I also want to add that recently there have been Native Americans that have been detained and questioned on their citizenship because, of course, some still are born and live their entire lives on reservations, which under federal treaty laws are sovereign nations within the United States and not technically American soil. And so they're technically being born in a foreign country, never registering with the American government, and now as they're doing their business, going in and out of the reservation, whether going to purchase food, whatever, they've been questioned on their immigration status, given that they've been born on the reservation and not registered with the United States government outside of just the federal ID for indigenous people on reservations.
And that's precisely what that 1940, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact year, but what that 1940 era's law for Native Americans was supposed to solve. But now, with the birthright citizenship now, so there's only two ways that people become citizens, right? Through birth on U.S. soil, which we call jus soli, or birth to U.S. parents, jus sanguinis. So by soil or by blood. So of course what the Trump administration is trying to do is trying to say, wait a minute, we don't believe that the 14th Amendment really includes everybody born here. But so far there have been, I can't remember how many exact courts have now ruled against it, but I think it's been like a half a dozen or more that have now ruled against the Trump administration. And we'll wait and see what happens with the Supreme Court in a few months. But I have pretty hopeful that that executive order will be found unlawful.
So we have a few questions online, and then I'll call on you. If you have a question in the audience, please stand up so that we know that you're there. And the other preference is to come up to this microphone so that we can balance between the online audience and the in-person audience. So a few questions from online that are aligned with this. What will DACA look like in the upcoming years? Now that DACA recipients can be police officers, does it look like there may be a pathway for us to to be in other government jobs? Can a DACA recipient get a license for cosmetology and or other state certificates? And are DACA students authorized to work in Colorado? If so, what documentation is needed for them to be hired?
So anyone who currently has DACA has work authorization. And they have all the ability to work, get licenses, and live their lives fully. The problem is either people who did not qualify for DACA, they're still dreamers, but they couldn't get into the program, and who don't have that status. For most people, there isn't an easy fix. The other part of the problem is people who currently have DACA, when that DACA expires, many of them will not have a path to any other type of status. Again, this is another, I'm just going to reiterate again that this is another reason why it's important to consult with an immigration attorney, because everybody's scenario is very unique. And there are some, we've been working with some documented young people who we've been able to transition from DACA to permanent residence through employment, some through marriage, some through, I would say mostly either marriage or through employment, or through just a few other different paths. So, but that's why it's just critical to consult with an attorney.
Some questions related to consulting with an attorney. I would imagine immigration attorneys are incredibly busy now. How can anyone who needs an attorney gain access in these tough times? And does it matter what state the attorney is licensed in?
No. Because immigration law is federal, you can meet with an immigration attorney in any state, by Zoom, by phone, whatever. You can also, there's also going to be a lot of immigration attorneys that practice in Colorado, but may be licensed in a different state, and that's perfectly acceptable. And yes, immigration attorneys are very busy, that's true. You may have to wait a couple weeks to meet with somebody. You're probably going to have to pay a consultation fee. In fact, I would say that you're probably better off paying a consultation fee than trying to meet with somebody who advertises a free consult, because either they don't have as much experience that you need, or they're not going to give you as much time and dedication that you need during that consultation.
Thanks. I have a question for the audience.
Okay. So I kind of wanted to circle back to the birthright citizenship thing. Obviously, anxieties are running pretty high right now, and I just wanted to hear from a professional if we see the downward trend with our rights being taken away continue. Do you have any sort of advice? I understand an attorney, but if it gets to the point where even birthright citizens are not legal here anymore, and of course we grew up here, do you think, how do you navigate that?
So, I mean, there's two different things. There's navigating it for your own personal situation, right? And that's the meeting with the attorneys, finding out what your rights are, et cetera, et cetera. There's also navigating it as a community. And that's why it's so important for people to get involved, stay involved. If we raise our voices as a collective, then we will have the power to push back on some of these actions. And so it's so important to get involved either in a local support group, in a statewide coalition, we work a lot with Public Immigrant Rights Coalition. That's a good organization to get involved in. There's a lot of other good organizations to get involved in. And obviously, anyone who is a U.S. citizen should exercise their right through their vote and through political activity. So if we all raise our voices and stay engaged, I think we'll be able to meet these challenges. Yes?
I have a couple more questions. One here, and then I'll go back at front.
Okay. Online, in reference to what you just said, there's a few things that go with that, so you want to add some context to these. How can people stand up against wrongful deportations while keeping themselves safe, asking for the single parents financially limited, unemployed, those at risk of being targeted or with challenged health? I have the heart to create radical change, but feels like I would have to risk everything. If we experience immigrants' rights being violated, aside from contacting an attorney, are there other avenues to seek support or report these violations? How can we best support community members affected by recent policy changes and directives?
Okay, if I can unpack that for a minute. One of the best, so let's step back for just a moment. One of the things that has been on the news a lot, of course, are so many of our international students having their visas revoked. Now, there is a bit of a silver lining. There was a big case the day before yesterday, or yesterday morning it came out, or Friday it came out, sorry, I can't remember which, but where several of those international students were reinstated by the court. And those revocations were found unlawful. So we are, even though it doesn't seem like it, we are seeing a lot of successful challenges in the court. I would say the provision of law that the administration is using to revoke international student status is such an obscure, old, never used provision. I had never heard of it. A colleague of mine who had been practicing since the 80s had never heard of it. A couple colleagues of mine, I should say. So it was such an obscure provision that the government is using for many of these cases, which is basically that the Secretary of State has found that that a particular person is politically bad for the United States. Is essentially the way of saying it. So it's a really hard fight, but we are seeing those battles. People who are here in any kind of temporary status, non-immigrant status, student status, even as we saw with permanent residents, I would say to be careful about leading some politically charged protest and putting yourself in a position, particularly, you want to be careful about putting yourself in any position that you could end up risking criminal charges. Because the other way that they're going through and revoking student status is based on criminal violations. Even we've seen extremely minor, old criminal violations. So just be very careful for anyone who is not a citizen. For anyone who is a citizen, we really need to hear your voices. And really being able to take the lead on some of these more politically charged issues. And again, just staying involved. We do have in Colorado, the Colorado Rapid Response Network. So if anyone believes that they see some kind of ICE activity or people's rights being violated, they can call into this hotline number. And I think it's right on the bottom of our Know Your Rights card. So they can call the number and report that, and there's kind of a coalition of organizations that are closely monitoring that. Okay, next question.
Right now, regarding education and hearing about DACA and what's happening, it's very discouraging for somebody to continue their education. I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's in behavioral health. How is this going to look like financially? Since right now there is CAFSA, that is state, it's not federal. What do we tell students in that case?
Can I take this one?
Yeah.
So from lived experience, I have deferred action for childhood arrivals. I've been advocating for immigrant rights since I was a child. And so establishing this executive order was the stories, was on the backs of stories from people who were brought here as children and decided to take on the federal government at that time, President Obama, demanding that he create a status that protected us from deportations. And after years of campaigning for that, we got it. Here in the state of Colorado, for years we were paying out of state tuition. Again, students organized and fought for that right to the same tuition as our peers who were graduating alongside us. You will never not benefit from an education. They can't take knowledge from it. right? And we're considering, right, what being boldly free to do what we want could mean in the future, right? But fighting for that freedom now could mean that we're sparking a change in the future too. So I really encourage you to continue your journey in behavioral health because it's needed. We also represent a community that is very diverse in our fields, right? Many of our parents are coming from the day labor, right, workforce that is, ongoing support for so many of the infrastructures in our lives, whether it's construction, hospitality, but these are careers that you do not need an education for. It is skilled labor and necessary, but as we pursue higher education, we're broadening the incredible workforce that we are actually a part of throughout the country. Our existence is resistance. And that has been our philosophy here in Colorado and nationally as undocumented immigrants and as a part of a vibrant history of immigrants who have been excluded in law, but in practice, right, although we are told we're unwanted, have been so direly needed for the growth of this nation, whether it's economy, its infrastructure, and of course the culture that we're building here in this country. The Chinese Exclusion Act happened right after they completed huge stretches of the railroad that connected the east to the west. We cannot forget that history because it's so much more a part of us than it is about the current administration. So for those of you that are feeling disenfranchised right now, that you feel like your voice doesn't matter, or that you feel that you have to retreat because of how the administration is expressing itself politically, don't. I'd say lean into that fear, act bravely, and some of that is moving forward with your plans because you have dreams further out than just this administration. We will outlive this administration, period. We will. And there will be another side of that. And I hope that by then, you do have your behavioral health degree.
We're going to continue with the presentation. And there'll be more time for questions and answers. While that's being pulled up, I'm gonna ask you one more question. Let's go with, why are we sending deportees to El Salvador? I thought deportees were typically sent back to their home country, not to prison. How and when did deportees get sent to foreign prisons, example El Salvador, rather than being deported to their country of origin without imprisonment?
That's a loaded question. So yes, under U.S. law and international law, we have a civil immigration court process called removal proceedings. That there first needs to be a determination by the judge before somebody can be deported. And then, if the person is ordered deported, then our U.S. government has to communicate with the home country government to negotiate that person going home. There are and there have been a handful of countries around the world that have refused to take their nationals back. And so Venezuela is one of those countries that has refused to take their nationals back. We also have certain forms of protection that say we can't return you to your home country, but if there's a third country that will take you, we can negotiate with that third country to take you as well. And that's in very, very specific scenarios. The scenario that we're seeing right now is actually unprecedented for a multitude of ways. It is against the law, both US law and international law, for us to deport individuals randomly to a third country to imprison them. There is no precedent for this whatsoever. The other important fact about deportation, remember I said that it's civil. Immigration removal proceedings are a federal civil proceeding. They are not criminal. There is no penalty. That involves taking your liberty. The only penalty is the civil penalty that orders you to leave. And that we have the ability to help you leave. But again, that is to be to your own country. This is so without precedence and unlawful because the idea that we are not just deporting people to a different random country than where they're from, but also jailing them for something that is not criminal to begin with for an indefinite period of time. There's no set sentence, and that we, U.S. taxpayers, are paying for. So we are hopeful, like everything else, we are hopeful that the courts are really going to come down on this recent practice.
I also want to add to that this is a practice in dictatorship authoritarianism. It's not new to this world, right? We had Russia when it was the USSR literally disappearing people and taking them to a Serbian prison. We had Germany, Nazi Germany, taking people, Jews from Germany and putting them in the concentration camp Auschwitz, which is, does anyone remember where that was? Poland, not in Germany. So when we see the rise of fascism, we have to name it, see it, and stop it. It is not just for those who could be targeted and placed in those prisons, but all of us, because we're responsible for the history of how our country behaves, whether with people who are born here or people who are coming here for opportunity. We do not do this to human beings. They are not just numbers. They are not, this is an unforgivable sin for our country, and we need to rectify it.
I would like to add, in the last week, I've learned about 3 cases of individuals who have disappeared, who cannot be found in their home country, are not on the list of people sent to El Salvador, who we have found out the government has admitted that they were deported, but won't provide information as to where, and their family has not been able to locate them anywhere. So we're trying to find out what is happening with those cases as well.
And just hopefully a quick follow-up to that, and then we'll move on. For those who have been deported to El Salvador, which laws would apply to them, U.S. law or El Salvador law?
Well, and I think that's a false equivalency, because to say that they're deported to El Salvador and we don't have any control over that, this isn't just the individuals have committed some kind of infraction in El Salvador under El Salvadoran government law. This is a contract that we, the United States government, has signed with the government of El Salvador to hold people for us. We're paying for. This is just like if you make a contract to buy a house, then you get to set the terms to some degree of how you're going to buy that house and how much you're going to pay, and the other person gets to set their terms. This was a negotiation, it was a contract. We're paying for people to be held there. They are there on our watch. So the idea of which law applies, certainly our laws still apply, but also international law applies. And I think that's another factor that's really getting missed in this conversation, is that we have international treaties and international conventions on these issues that are also being violated.
All right. Well, this is the Know Your Rights portion of the training. We created this training to equip immigrants and allies with the knowledge and information they need to resist unlawful immigration and customs enforcement and federal detention. We want to give you the tools to differentiate from local police and federal law enforcement. Also, to understand key rights that are given to you through the Constitution so that you can protect yourself. And then lastly, learn key phrases that you can use to engage those constitutional rights if and when you need to protect yourself against unlawful detention. So, I have to say it, you have rights. Every single one of you, whether you're a documented or a US born citizen, you have rights here in the United States, just for being on US soil. The Constitution does not talk about citizens or immigrants, it talks about people. And we are protected under the Constitution. To protect yourself, you have to practice this knowledge. It's not something that you have today and then pull out of your pocket tomorrow. It's something you have to actively practice. If and when you ever encounter a police officer that wants to detain you, they could detain you if you do not stop them and reference law that could protect you. Their job is to take control of the situation and meet their quotas, and through this administration have been set high, right? We've seen the videos of people being kidnapped by force, unconstitutionally, and reflecting to them that you know their right, you know your rights, could mean the difference between unlawful detention and walking away from the situation in which violence can be posed on you. So I do want to name that this isn't the catch-all tool, right? It's important to know your rights. And the other part is, I'm not a lawyer. These are just best practices. There are some questions that Joy can answer, but mostly, you know, all your particular stories and information and background are key to many of your answers. So 95% of your questions will be answered with, I'm not sure, you should talk to an attorney. But we'll try our best when it comes to knowing your rights and how to, what the best practice is. I also want to say that, you know, take care of yourself. This is intense conversations that we're going to be having because it is about, you know, the loss of freedom and protecting your rights and enforcement of those laws by physical brute force. And so when we practice these rights, it can feel violent because it is violent, right? The sovereignty of someone's freedom is probably the most important part of what it is to be in the United States and why many people come here. And so when we have these conversations, of course, it can get emotional. So take care of yourself as we go through this. Walk away if you need to. Take a deep breath. Take a sip of water. These are intense conversations we're going to have. Apart from that, you know, we cannot say what police or ICE are going to do in the moment. That's why we need to stick to what we know and what rights we have so that you can have the best possible outcome, but it doesn't mean it will go your way every time. Apart from that, you know, we cannot wait for someone to come and save us. There will not be a Superman that comes and saves us from a bad guy. We will be the tool that we need, and we need to train ourselves to live up to that moment. I do want to name one thing that I excluded from this presentation. The Constitution was written to protect the wealth of white men, white landowners. So the changes to the Constitution, right, were, as time went on, improvements to the Constitution, but with that very real historical, you know, tie to elitist, racist, classist, right, notions that this country was built on. And so I know that sometimes, as we know, yes, you do have a right, but I do want you to know that you should always protect your physical safety first. Although you have some rights, maybe exercising the right to film a cop, depending on the color of your skin, will be taken differently. And so I do want to say, protect your life beyond all measures, right? There's not a conversation that we can't have later that isn't completely overshadowed if you are killed. So protect yourself by all means. So the Constitution can protect you, but remember when you're exercising your rights, just think about how these actions will be taken, especially when the party is trying to take control of the situation. So just to give you a little bit of historical context of Colorado, 20 years ago, we were one of the most anti-immigrant states in the country. We were actually one of the first states to have a show me your papers law, which gave police, actually it mandated that local police have the duty of federal law enforcement to check your papers to see if you were legally here in the country if they suspected that you were undocumented. And of course, this is racist, right? There's no way to tell whether a person is undocumented. Trump claims that he can tell by looking at your shoes. Wrong. There's no case in which you can look at somebody and say definitively, you have papers or don't, right? So this was all based on racial profiling and later was actually undone through the means of undocumented people that were targeted by this law. Undocumented people who were in deportation proceedings and targeted by local police testified and helped write the law to undo these anti-immigrant laws here in Colorado. And so in 2013, they testified, wrote a bill called the Trust Act to repeal SB 90, and that passed. Now, it is no longer the job of local police to do the job of federal law enforcement. And I can say proudly that I was a part of that movement, saw mostly women who stood up to their state representatives and said, we belong here and we deserve better than our police turning on us when we called them for help, right? Women who were fearful of their own safety stood in front of our own legislature and said that we deserve better as Colorado residents, even though they were in deportation proceedings and may not even benefit from the law. Incredible work, and just goes to show how resilient this community is. These are the kind of people we want in our community that fight to change the laws that don't even benefit them. So, to talk about, right, the difference between local police and federal police, especially when we talk about, this law that changed, right, SB 90, and later was repealed by the Trust Act. It's important to know who's standing in front of you, who's pulled you over, and who's trying to get your information. So knowing the difference between local police and federal law enforcement can be the difference, right, between being detained and having your rights violated, and sometimes even helped by your own words. Here in the state of Colorado, right, we have 3 different law enforcements. Well, there's more, but we're going to focus on 3 of the main that we usually interact with. Local police, right, here in Colorado Springs, we have the Colorado Springs Local Police Department, and their jurisdiction is within the boundaries of Colorado Springs. They have the job of enforcing local, state, and federal laws, but do not have they don't have the job of federal law enforcement. So they can't detain someone for not having immigration status. Under Colorado law, they cannot even ask them about legal status. And so, yeah, local police are not federal police, cannot ask for immigration status. Now, your county sheriffs, we will see sheriffs mostly at our courthouses or our jails. Their duty is to make sure that they're supervising the jail, serving papers, and ensuring that the protection of judicial process. They can also serve papers like evictions, and we usually see them when people are being transferred to jail. This is also where a majority of detentions have happened historically here in Colorado, where ICE will tell them, hey, you have an inmate that I have an interest in, keep them there until we get there, and they have followed suit in the past. In fact, I think that your county sheriff here in Colorado Springs, which is in Paso County Sheriff, has said that they will work with immigration, but that's also in violation of state law that says that they shouldn't coordinate with federal law enforcement using ICE holds or requests by ICE to detain people. They also are not tasked with the job of federal law enforcement. State Patrol. This one's a special one because they do work along the boundaries of the state of Colorado and do in some way work with customs. If and when they work with immigration, it's usually based on human trafficking, right? Sex workers, labor workers that are being forced into servitude. And so usually when they're working with immigration, it's on those means. Outside of that, they're just trying to make sure that things that are traveling in and out of the state of Colorado are within the state and federal laws. Again, they are not tasked specifically with checking immigration status, and under Colorado law, they can't. And the last thing, they're also tasked with protecting state buildings like the Capitol. Lastly, immigration and customs enforcement. So they are literally the police for the federal government to enforce federal immigration law. They are the people that will ask for immigration status. The one thing that I do want to say here is that without probable cause, you do not have to engage federal law enforcement. You can tell them, you can exercise your right to tell them nothing unless they have a warrant with your particular name on it. You don't have to give them any information. They may try to coerce you into doing that, but you don't have to. I will say that for law enforcement generally, that is not federal law enforcement, if they ask you your information and have told you that they suspect you of a crime and they're looking into it, you have to give them minimally your name and your date of birth, okay? And of course, if you're under arrest, they will try to identify you by all other means. But federal law enforcement, nothing unless they have a warrant with your specific name on it, and outside of that, you don't have to talk to them. All right? It's a lot, all right? We're going to go into the Constitution. So, like I said, the Constitution talks about people. People are protected on U.S. soil by the Constitution established by specific amendments to the Constitution. You should have gotten a Know Your Rights card with particular phrases on them. Some of them are paraphrased here, but they are all pretty common and close to these. So, have I done anything wrong? Am I free to leave? Right. Let's practice that together. Have I done anything wrong? Am I free to leave? All right, again. Have I done anything wrong? Am I free to leave? 2. I don't consent to a search. I don't consent to a search. Now you might ask yourself, I would never say consent to a search. That seems weird. If and when we're using these types of words, it's because law enforcement has been trained to listen to these words because it engages the Constitution and it's calling them out on whether or not they're following the law. All right, so saying, I do not consent to a search will trigger in their brain, right, my training. I don't have permission to search this person or their car or their house, okay? Because if not, if they violate that request, then we can take them to court, and then it's a different fight. I would like to speak to a lawyer. I would like to speak to a lawyer. Right. I do want to say that on this specific one, you do have the right to an attorney, always. You have the right to hire an attorney in immigration court, all right? In criminal defense, if you can't afford one will be provided for you at the government's expense. That is not true about immigration court. Because it is a civil violation, it cannot be covered by any tax dollars. It's on you. All right? So although you have the right to an attorney, really you have the right to hire your attorney. Okay? That's why it's important to speak to an attorney on the front end so that they know your information beforehand. Next, I do not consent to a search. I would like to see an arrest warrant. I do not consent to a search. I would like to see a search warrant or arrest warrant. All right. Now we're going to skip the last one just for time. But the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment establishes, right, probable cause for search, seizure, and arrest. And so with this, right, probable cause is important. What is probable cause? All right? There are three ways that a police officer can gain probable cause. The first is permission from you. You can give them permission, right? You can waive your Fourth Amendment rights. They say, can I search you? You say yes, right? Search your car, search your home, yes. Enter your home, freely give them information, that's consent. All right? The other two ways, right? One is through a warrant. A judge has decided, after being provided evidence by that officer or a team of officers, yes, you do have permission to go into that home to search for forged documents, marijuana, cocaine, whatever. All right? Or arrest that particular person. And then lastly is that all there? Okay. Got it. Okay. So I said you can give them permission, a warrant, and evidence of a crime. That's readily available. All right? My favorite example, which is kind of a ludicrous example, easy to say, okay, they have probable cause. You're driving, but there's a splash of blood on your windshield that is very evident. That police officer will be able to arrest you to investigate why there is blood on your windshield. Right? There are other things, right? But there needs to be clear evidence pretty good evidence of a crime. You know that in other states, marijuana is not illegal. The smell of marijuana could be evidence of a crime. Other things like that, right? Screams coming from a house, right? Somebody calls and it has been a witness to a crime. All of those things could give a police officer enough probable cause to detain you, question you, enter your home, enter your car, search your pockets. And so that's the Fourth Amendment. And you engage that by asking them, have I done anything wrong? Am I free to leave? You're establishing if there's a crime that they think that you're committing or have committed, and if you are okay with walk away with your freedom. Okay? Fifth Amendment. I think most popularly we've heard this, right, used in TV shows where somebody is on the stand and they say, I plead the fifth, right? The right to remain silent and also the right to not incriminate yourself. And so this is important because, of course, when I said, right, depending on if it's federal or local police, what do you have to give federal law enforcement if they're questioning you? Wrong. That's local police. If the feds are questioning you and they don't have a warrant with your particular name, your particular house, your particular property, then nothing. All right? Unless they have evidence of a crime that you're committing at the moment or that someone's been witness to, nothing. All right? And you always have that right. Local law enforcement, under Colorado law, you have to give your name and date of birth. But again, you have to ask them, have I done anything wrong? If they don't suspect you of a crime, then nothing. So I've established what probable cause is. Sixth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment is the right to know the charges against you. This is also the right to due process. right? We talked about how some of that is already being usurped by executive order, and the administration's drive to detain and deport people they believe shouldn't be in the country. And so, have I done something wrong? Have I committed a crime? Right? Again, establishing, whether or not they have probable cause. Okay. So, I keep talking about the other part of probable cause, which is a warrant. It's a lot of information to go through here, but there are 3 key elements of a warrant. That it has your full name, what the officer is looking for, specifically, date, today's date, and then the signature of the judge. That was 4 things. The reason that I said particularly looking for is because it determines whether it's a search warrant or an arrest warrant. Right. So, the other part is that it is your name as it's written on your birth certificate. So if it doesn't have your second surname or your first name is misspelled, right? They used a B instead of a V in Victor. It's not a valid warrant. And so one part that I want to point out here, and Joy really helped me understand this, is that if it's not written on a federal district court heading, then it's not a valid warrant, usually, right? Here, you have 2 documents that at the very top name that it's from the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This one actually says warrant on it. This one says notice of action. Notice of action here is what we call ICE holds. This is a request from an agent, an ICE agent, to your local jail saying, hold that person. It's a request. This one is used to inform that someone is under a warrant of removal, usually administrative, from office to office. And then this one here also says warrant, but if you look, it doesn't actually have a place or location for a judge to sign. In the signature section, it says immigration officer. The immigration officer doesn't have the right to give that order. They don't have the power to sign this as a magistrate or in place of a magistrate. Again, not a valid warrant. Now, look at this one. Completely different. It's from the United States District Court. And it says, United States versus so-and-so. And again, it has the key elements. Full name, date, and the signature from a judge, which clearly says, judge, magistrate, U.S. magistrate judge, right there. All right? So, if it says Department of Homeland Security on it, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the header, and it's not coming from a U.S. District Court, then most likely it's not a valid warrant. All right? And so if it doesn't have those key elements, then you can say no. Come back when you have a real warrant. All right? And then after that, I'm practicing my right to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney. Have I committed any crimes? Use your magic phrases. All right? So again, these are the specifics on the order. So that first one that you saw was an immigration detainer or a notice of action, more commonly known as ICE holds. So if you are, say here in Colorado Springs, and you have a relative that was brought in, has questionable status or no status, right, and you bailed them out, they may tell you, sorry, we can't release them because they have an ICE hold. Under state law, that is illegal, okay? Demand that they release them immediately. But here, as you'll see, the reason that they're not a legitimate warrant from immigration is because it's not signed by a judge, does not create probable cause, is more of a request that is not mandatory, and can be refused by local government. And I say can be because that's usually at the discretion in other states. Here in the state of Colorado, they cannot comply with it. It's state law. And when they ask, what establishes that, you let them know that it's Virginia's law that was passed in 2019. So similarly, right, the arrest warrant, it has to have a full name as it appears on the birth certificate, current date, and signed by a judge. I'm gonna skip it just because we reviewed the others. So, like I said, this is a tool. I do have more cards. Please feel free to ask me for more. But this is a tool that you can use if you don't feel comfortable actually exerting your rights, like I had mentioned. You can rip off the screen part, hand it to the officer, and let them know that you're going to remain silent. The other card is for you, one, the phrases so that you can actively tell them, continually tell them your rights. And then the other part is the rapid response number. If you are witnessing a raid or think you're witnessing a raid, call this number, give them all the details that you can of what you observed. They will send somebody there to verify what happened. You can follow them on Facebook under the Rapid Response Network and get an update on what happened, okay? Take pictures, be nosy if you can, right? Of course, practice safety and report it, okay? The last part is immigration attorney, just a space for their name and their number. You can keep this in your wallet. If you are arrested, write that number on your arm. Keep it with you. Know that you can call them. You have the right to speak to them. All right, and we will leave it there. Open up for questions.
We had one question from the audience, yeah.
Going back to your birthrights discussion, what about people that, like myself, my father was in the military, I was therefore born in West Germany on a military base. And I know that that counts as birthright. Is that something that could potentially end up in jeopardy with the birthright status trying to be removed or taken, ended? Is that something that would it potentially be in danger, or is that something that's protected under a different piece of the Constitution or a different process?
So right now, what the Trump administration is really focusing on is birth on U.S. soil. So remember I said at the beginning that there's two ways, birth through U.S. parents or birth on U.S. soil, or both. Right now, the administration is really focusing on just the birth on U.S. soil.
Is a military base considered U.S. soil though?
No. You have the opposite protection. Your parent was a U.S. citizen. So you have citizenship by derivation. You derive citizenship from your parent, regardless of where you were born. Now, there are some creative legal arguments about whether birth on a military base constitutes U.S. soil for our purposes, but we won't go into that here. But what the Trump administration is focusing on is individuals born on U.S. soil, but to both parents who were not citizens at the time of birth.
What can someone do when the arresting authorities don't show badges or warrants?
So first and foremost, all of us have the right, if anybody approaches us and claims to be law enforcement, we have the immediate right to ask for identification. And that's actually just a really good common safety practice regardless. So we all have the right to ask for the identification, the agency that they're with. Are you Colorado Springs Police? Or are you the sheriff? Or are you ICE? And we can also ask for badge number, or even some, like ICE agents will often carry business cards. So we can always ask for that identification out front.
I think we have a question from the audience.
So if your parents were not documented and were enlisted and with the hope of pursuing citizenship through that avenue, and you were born overseas, either at locally or on a military installation, what might be a good course of action to secure your status?
Okay, just to make sure I understand. So you're saying if the parents were not US citizens, but were military?
Yes.
US military?
Yes.
And to a child that was born overseas or a child born on US soil?
Child born overseas.
That would need to actually consult with an immigration attorney to determine whether that child was actually born a citizen or not born a citizen. Because that's a difference between, there are some bases overseas that are actually considered US soil, some bases are not. And so whether that was a birth on US soil is a very complex issue that would need to have an immigration attorney look at.
I had a second question, I'm so sorry. But what is the relationship between if you have a tax ID to pay taxes but don't have a social, so you've been paying taxes through that avenue, is that a helpful thing in the current climate or is not?
Well, that's a loaded question. So we have social security numbers in the United States that are issued to US citizens, as well as being issued to all immigrants who are authorized to work in the United States. And once a social security number is issued, it is your number. So a common thing that we see is individuals who had lawful status, had a lawfully issued social security number, but later lost that status. They don't lose that number is still theirs, right? Now, for individuals who have no lawful entitlement to a social security number, they are allowed to apply for what's called a taxpayer identification number, a TIN number. And that number is specifically to file taxes. So that number is not to show for employment. It is not allowed to work with. It is only for the sole purpose of filing taxes. So what we commonly see is individuals who have been here undocumented, often for decades, who work just like everybody else, and at the end of the year they file the taxes. And we just saw that the Trump administration is trying to pressure IRS to share that data with ICE to be able to use that for enforcement. That again is going to be the subject of litigation, or is, I don't know if those have been filed yet, because that taxpayer data under tax laws is considered private. So it's privacy laws that govern our tax versus that, whether immigration can access that. I would say that for individuals in that situation, the overwhelming majority have lived here for decades. Their information is already out there. They've been filing with that taxpayer ID number for years. I don't see much of a risk to them by changing their habits now. Do you understand? So I wouldn't recommend one or the other. I think it's up to the individual. But I would say for most people, continuing to live their lives and follow the law as best they can is the best way to proceed. Because if you don't file your taxes, then you could get in trouble under a whole separate set of laws, right? So again, if you have particular questions, that's another good reason to consult with an immigration attorney, but then you also have to look at the tax side.
Just a reminder, if you're online, please go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. We still have time to ask those. I'm going to ask another online question, and then we'll get to folks in the audience. What is the difference between the process the Trump administration is using now and what other administrations have used as renditions?
Repeat that question one more time?
Yes.
What is the difference between the process the Trump administration is using and what other administrations have used in the past as renditions? I'm assuming that that's a legal term.
Yes, okay, so I think, yes. So what the question is getting at is how is what the Trump administration doing different than past administrations in the way that they're deporting people? And the answer is yes, very different. And then the second part of the question is how? And here's the very important distinction. under our immigration laws, any person who has been in the United States for at least 2 years is entitled by law to a hearing in immigration court. He put it up for just a second, but it was a slide on what we call expedited removal. For people who have been in the United States for less than 2 years, by law, ICE can do what we call expedited removal, where they can remove a person without giving them an opportunity to see the judge. Now, even for people who've been here for less than 2 years, there are many exceptions where those individuals still have the right to see the judge, particularly if they have an application pending or they have some type of status or other type of permission. With nothing pending, if they've been here for less than 2 years, they can just be removed by ICE. If they've been here for over 2 years, they have that right to see the judge. The Trump administration is not honoring the right to see the judge. And so what we saw with the plane loads who went to El Salvador is people who were picked up by ICE and determined to be a gang member, and then determined to be under this Alien Enemies Act, and simply deported without their right to see the judge, without the right to any determination as to whether they're a gang member, and for many of them in blatant violation of laws because they had an application pending or a process pending or had even been granted status. With Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he was granted a very specific form of refugee protection. He was specifically ordered not to be deported to El Salvador. So that's why his case is so special, because our refugee laws, again, US law and international law, have specific refugee protections, and he was deported in blatant violation of those laws. Next.
Go ahead, and then we'll have a question here.
Okay. Does the word have to be understood by the person receiving it, like in their language?
For immigration, no. Our federal immigration agencies do not have any duty to provide certain things in other languages, but there is a duty in certain circumstance to have an interpretation. Okay? For example, when people are first taken into ICE custody and they're given certain advisals, those advisals must be interpreted. When they undergo a sworn statement, the sworn statement must be interpreted. When they are served with the initial notice to appear, that has to be they have to have a translation of that. So in some cases, specific circumstances, yes, but in most scenarios, no.
Question here.
First of all, thank you for all the information you're sharing with us. It's really helpful for everyone. Regarding this Fourth Amendment, I do not need the permission to enter to my home. I have heard some attorneys say that's applied to your car. But you have seen probably in the news 2 or 3 times somebody in the car and ask the officer outside, "You have a warrant?" "No, I don't have it." "You have to show me." "I don't need to show you. So you open the door or I break your window." And they break the window and arrest the people or the person without a warrant. Now, I don't know how to proceed with these kind of cases. And besides that, if I have I heard now the new real ID gonna be ended up or be active in May. Is the only document that I need to show to the officer, or do I need something else to show him?
So we're gonna both answer this one. So in your car, you have a duty to police officers to show your driver's license, your registration, and your insurance, right? That's to police officers, and that is a specific rule for cars, okay?
That's local police. Remember, not federal law enforcement. They cannot and should not be issuing any citations or checking on your right to drive.
And then do you want to talk about the Fourth Amendment?
So as for the Fourth Amendment, right, here in the state of Colorado, you have every right to record. Again, you have to have best practices here. The best practice is tell them, no, right? You don't have the right to enter my home. I don't have to open the door because, right, you are protected against unlawful search and seizure and arrest. And so if they don't have probable cause, which in those cases they may not have had that probable cause, you have no duty to open the door or give them permission for that probable cause.
And for that's why it's so important to use the magic words that Victor was talking about earlier, so that you can instantly relay to the officer, I do not consent to a search of my car. You use those magic words, and very importantly too, we always want to be polite. We always want to stay calm. When you're in a car particularly, keep your hands where they can be seen, and you're staying calm at all time, but firm. I do not consent to a search of my car. Respectfully, officer, I do not consent to a search of my car.
If you have access, right, let them know that you're filming, right? Take the phone out slowly, protect your life, right? This could look like an aggressive action, a knife or a gun, right? And they may say that to get immunity from prosecution. And so film, record. If you can't film, write down what you experienced after if you can. And then lastly, right, if you can afford, right, get dash cams, get cameras in your home. Those are not subject to change, right? Once it's recorded, you can show those to a court and show, like, I expressed they cannot enter, and they entered anyway. They hadn't established probable cause, and they illegally entered my home. Like, those are the things that you can fight in court. Again, we cannot know what a police officer will do in the moment. We've captured moments in which they act outside of the law, and they have every right to do, everyone has the right to due process. In that case, we take them to court. We let them know that this officer of the law was outside of the bounds of the law and should, right, pay for that consequence, whether it's the federal government or local police that have violated your rights.
We're reaching the end of time, so I'm going to get the questions from online, and then we'll go back to in person if we have time. What do we do when we know a student is undocumented? And similarly, I've been working with a Venezuelan student over the past few months. How can I be sure I've exhausted the support I can provide? Our last meeting involved the student waiting to meet with an immigration lawyer.
You know, I think that it's a difficult question. Obviously, from a school standpoint, just providing support to students is probably the best thing that you could do. We have a lot of uncertainty right now because, again, you know, as I was explaining earlier, we have many, particularly Venezuelans who had lawful status or have the right to lawful status, but those rights right now are in jeopardy under the Trump administration terminating those programs. And also, with the right to lawful status, many Venezuelans in particular have the right to asylum, but that process can take a considerable amount of time, and it's a very difficult process to go through. So I think from a school standpoint, just trying to provide the support as best to that student as possible. Again, if the student wants to learn about other groups in Colorado, I recommend that they can look up the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. Another one is AFSC, American Friends Service Committee. The Quakers, and they're just a really fantastic organization to help provide immigrants with a sense of community and to help advocate for their rights.
I'd say lastly, create space for them, right? If the advocacy group doesn't exist now, create it. Find ways to help represent those students. If there's no policy at the school to protect those students from ICE just entering the building and asking anyone and everyone for their status, or what the administration would do, right? The school administration would do if they were presented, a request for a student's information or their data, right? We've already seen this move by the Trump administration from Harvard, that they have to turn over, right, their curriculum and so on and so forth. Like, what will this school do to protect them? And if those protections don't exist, work with the students to advocate for them, right? A lot of people are being persecuted for being in the front of those rallies, leading the charge. Unfortunately, right now, it doesn't seem right for the people who are most directly impacted by immigration to be at the forefront, because we've seen what the administration will do. They will punish them. So we need allies to stand up and say what's morally right. And what our duty is to make sure that it's represented not only in our culture and how we treat people, but also in the administration of our policies.
And it seems like we're going to leave with a few unanswered questions. If your question is not answered, please email it to me. Joy has agreed that I could send her a list of questions afterwards. She'll answer those in writing and send those back to us. We're going to try and get everything done that we can. But it looks like we've got about 2 minutes left, so I want to close with something more closely related to Pike Speak and both of your expertise. With the country in such turmoil, what major or career would you recommend for a freshman at Pike Speak who strongly desires to create positive change for people on our planet and our community?
I think there's many good careers. I mean, I think that so many people in our community help in so many different ways. I may work in a legal background, and obviously, there's many opportunities in the legal world, but I would say that I've seen many people in our healthcare industry providing valuable roles to their community. I've seen many people in our school, our academic, whether it's in K through 12 education or the college setting. There's so many different ways that you can impact community and that you can be a part of something greater, right? I think we all give back.
I mean, Joy and I were just talking about unfinished work, maybe taking another fork in the road. And I honestly believe that some of the most pivotal changes has been done by office workers in a local politician's office, in a local government that has pushed in the right direction, right? So I would definitely advise, political science, sociology, people who make those data points that help people really understand the human nature of how we function, and also put a face, right, to this work. On the other side, right, I truly believe that art is so important in showing, right, how we should show up in these spaces. On the side, I act and I monologue about my experiences being an undocumented person growing up here in Colorado. And I know I've spoken to people who never expected to defend me in a public forum, reach out to me and say thank you for showing up, for letting me know who you are and who you represent, because I care deeply. And so yeah, I think if you choose a career path that reflects morals that you believe are right, then I think there's no wrong answer here.
So we're going to close the call. They will hang out in the room for a minute. We just have to clear the stage because there's an event starting at 4:30. We have to clear the stage for that. So if you're online, thank you for joining us online. Over 110 people joined us online today. And in person, we'll be able to chit-chat at the back of the room for a little while. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Round of applause. Yes,
thank you so much for sharing and coming out. Really appreciate the work that you're both doing. It's really tremendous. Can we readily share this information with community resources?
Absolutely.
Okay. And,